Okay, this tutorial is going to cover scene editing and assets in Acadicus. So this tutorial is going to be focused on VR mode, where you can edit scenes, and it's going to be using Acadicus Pro. So assuming you have an Acadicus Pro subscription, you'll have an administrative username and password and a room passcode that you can work in. So using that admin login and using your passcode, you can enter into your space in Acadicus where you will be able to edit scenes. And if you've logged in as admin, you will see this menu appear when you first log in. If you don't see that, what you're going to want to do is press and hold the Oculus home button on your left controller. So if I came in and maybe my menu is somewhere off in space, if I press and hold this lower Oculus home button, it'll snap the menu right back in. If you want to move the menu, you can point at it anywhere and use the lower trigger on the handle of your controller by your middle finger. If you point at it and press and hold that button, you can move the menu around. While you're holding it, you can press up on the joystick to move it away or down on the joystick to move it closer, and position it in your scene wherever you'd like. So we're going to be going into the edit mode. To go into these tools, we're going to use the top trigger. So top trigger by your index finger. I'm going to go to edit, and I'm going to go to assets. And in assets, I'm going to go to the top tab called packs. And you can scroll through this by just pointing at it somewhere and using your top trigger to just kind of grab it. You can even like go way beyond the menu to scroll up and down. There's a ton of content packs here. We're going to be organizing these more going forward, but right about, I would say, if the scroll bar, like right now, as of the capture of this recording, if you put the scroll bar around that point, you'll find these settings. So these are content packs that have environment settings in them. So right now we're in the default grid room here. So this is like the behind the scenes scene. We want to work in a different scene for this recording. So we'll go ahead and download the medical settings pack. And I'm going to hit get. And you want to make sure you wait until the progress bar is all the way across before you download any other packs. But with those environment settings downloaded, if I go over to my scenes menu, I can click on my setting. I want to change my setting away from this grid room and hit change. And I can see all of the settings that I now have available to change my room into. So let's see. Let's work in an empty space for the purpose of this tutorial. I'm going to go ahead and enter this simulation hall. Actually, no, let's go to the main lobby outside. So I'm going to select that, and it's going to load that environment. Now my room, the room that I'm working in, has now changed to have this as its environment. I haven't left the room. I'm still in the same room number that I started in, but I've changed the environment setting, and you do that in your scenes menu under the settings. If you want to change the starting point where people will enter when they come into the scene, you can click on this starting point. And it might seem like nothing happened, but if you back up and look down, you see that there's this arrow. And if you use, again, that lower trigger to, I'm going to move my, if I use that lower trigger, I can point at that arrow and I can pick it up just like any other asset, and surface align is set. So it's going to be aligning to the surface of the ground. Sometimes it'll break through, but you can kind of get it close. While you've got it grabbed on, you can move your joystick, press your joystick left or right to rotate the position of that. If it goes through the ground, just press down on your joystick to bring it a little closer. But the goal here is to get this positioned in just about the right location where we want the visitor to begin. And then once I've got that positioned, I could now save my scene so that we'll have this starting point. So to do that, in my scenes menu, I'm going to go up here and click on new scene. I'm going to hit clear, and I'm going to type in demo demo 1. And then we'll hit submit and save, and then we'll verify that save. So now demo 1 is saved, and whenever anybody comes into this room, they're going to see this room and they'll start at this starting point. One little trick is that the starting point object is not teleportable, so I can't actually teleport on it. Sometimes it's a little confusing, so you can actually go into your menu and make that teleportable, and you can even make that arrow invisible to learners. So I'm in edit mode, so I still see it, but if I go to learner mode, now I don't see that. It'll still function. People will still begin at that point, at that point, but they just can't see the actual arrow. Sometimes I'll even kind of move this down a little bit so that it doesn't, if I grab onto this arrow, we'll talk more about these gizmos in a little bit. I might tuck it under the floor even a little bit so it's completely obscure and people in non-VR mode won't be bumping into it at all. So I'm going to resave now that I lowered that down. Cool. That is how you change your environment, how you create the starting point, and how you download environments. So that's all of that is covered now. While we're here, you can actually grab onto this little sun thing and you can move the sun around, which is cool. You can turn the sun off or on. You can reload your scene if you want to, and you can create a new scene here while we're in this tab. All right, so scene editing. Let's create a scene. So if we go back to our assets, again, assets and packs is where we downloaded the settings, and there's a lot of different settings you can download here. And you can also download content packs of assets. So if I scroll, let's grab this and scroll way down, we've got all these different asset packs we can download. And let's see. I'm going to download the IV equipment pack because I don't already have it. I'm going to hit get. And now that's downloaded. And if I go into my inventory, if I go, so in assets inventory, this is where you can see all of the assets that you have downloaded as packs. So I've already had a bunch of assets downloaded. So I'm going to go to show all. And on the right side, I see this grid of different things and I see these arrows. If I want to scroll through, this is basically going to be browsing through all of the content that I have downloaded. And I can just kind of scroll through and press next and next, and it'll load these little previews. And that's where I can bring these things into my scene. If I want to go directly to a content pack, I could go to filter just by medical. And now that I've selected medical, this next row is all of the medical assets. And I could say medical equipment and IV. So now we have our IV stand. So we have the complete IV stand together, and then we have the individual assets that are hanging from the IV stand. So if I want to bring this into my scene, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my menu over. Again, just lower trigger, middle finger. I'm just going to grab that menu and move it over. If I want to detach a menu, I can actually grab this top one and I can just park that menu somewhere off to the side if I want to and move the main menu over. So now I'm just working with assets. And I'm going to point my controller at the IV stand asset, and I'm going to press and hold the lower trigger on my controller. So I'm going to grab it and press and hold. And there we have it. I've got the IV stand in my scene. Now, if I use, while I'm holding on to it, I've still got that lower trigger held onto it. I'm holding that down. While I'm holding that, if I press up on my joystick or down on my joystick, I can fine tune the position of it, or I can press left or right on my joystick to rotate it. Now, while you have the object selected on your main menu, if we bring that back into our scene here, in fact, let's just put the assets menu back into the main menu. You can just sock it right back in there by placing it over the top. While I have that selected, I have my selected object context menu over here. So here's where I can do things like, for example, let's move it over here to make it a little easier. One of the key, and I'll even bring it a little closer so we can make sure you can see it. Surface align is going to be, if you notice when I pick it up, if I place it near the ground, it snaps to the ground like that. And I can kind of even slide it or move it along that surface if I want to. And that's because I have surface align turned on. If I turn surface align off, now it's just breaking through. So some assets you don't want to be aligning to a surface and some you do. In this case, having the surface align is pretty helpful because it puts it right on the floor, and this is an object that rolls around on the floor, so that makes sense. So when you have an object selected, I guess while we're still here in the context menu, there's a bunch of things. We can make this asset invisible if we want to. We could make it actionable. It is an actionable asset. We could make it so you can teleport onto it if you'd like. And we could make it laser grabbable or hand grabbable while in learner mode. So these are addressing learner mode only. If you want to be able to pick this asset up, if you want a learner to be able to pick it up, you'll want to make sure that these are toggled on. Now, this is a composite asset, meaning that there are several different assets attached to this single asset. So we've got the stand, but then if you remember from our asset menu over here, we've also got the individual bags of fluid that are attached. So those are up here, and those are separate. If we wanted to make this learner, just the bags interactive by a learner, what we would want to do is turn this on. Laser grabbable is going to make it so you can grab it from a distance using your laser. If I press my B button, I can turn my laser on. If I want to be able to select it just using a laser from a distance, that's laser grabbable. Hand grabbable is if I want to be able to pick it up by putting my hand right up and just grabbing onto it that way with my hand. So if we want to make these laser and hand grabbable, if I turn that on, it'll say, do you want to toggle all of the socketed assets as well? So yes, I do, because I want all those bags to be learner interactable, grabbable. So I'm going to hit yes. But now the problem is if I go into learner mode, oops, I still have that one asset as invisible. Let me turn this back on, make it visible, and make everything visible. There we go. So now I've got this set up as interactive, but I can pick up the whole thing. That's probably not what we want, right? You don't want a learner to be able to grab onto the whole thing and accidentally move it around like that. So we're going to go back into our edit mode, and we're going to pick this asset up, and I'm going to turn off laser grabbable. Now, do you want to turn off on all the socketed assets? No, I don't. So I'm going to hit no. All of the bags are still set to yes. So now if I go into learner mode and I try to grab onto this IV stand, I can't grab it. Great. But what about these? Yes, I can. So again, grabbable, it's laser grabbable, not hand grabbable. So if I point at a distance like this, I can grab it. It's not hand grabbable yet, so I still can't grab it like this, but it's laser grabbable, so I can grab it at a distance. All right. So if I select it again, and now we're going to do the same thing for hand grabbable. So I do want it to be hand grabbable, and I want all of the sub-sockets to be hand grabbable. I'm going to turn it back off again, and I don't want the sockets to be turned off. So that makes it just so that the individual stand is not grabbable. I know that's a little confusing. There's probably easier ways we can do that that we're going to be working on our interface overhaul. But for now, that's what you can do. And now I should be able to grab these by my hand, or I can grab them from a laser, and I cannot grab onto the IV pole. Okay, so that is how you download an asset pack from the pack. So again, we're in Assets, Packs. We downloaded the IV equipment. We went back into Inventory, and we were able to find that in Medical Equipment IV. We brought that asset into our scene. We can use Surface Align to have it snap to the ground. So it's not snapping. Sometimes it'll break through, but you just kind of have to pick it up and position it where you want. You can rotate using your joystick, or you can push it up or down on your joystick to pull it closer or farther away. Here's another more advanced technique, but if you actually press down, so on your joystick, if you depress it in, not press it down, but like press it in when you're grabbing an asset. So I've got it grabbed on. Now I'm going to depress that joystick. And now when I move my joystick left or right, I scale it. So I can scale this thing way up if I want to, or way down if I want to make a little tiny version for some reason, maybe like a tabletop exercise or something. You can change. So I'm holding on to it still. I depress the joystick. Now it's changing scale. If I depress the joystick again, so you can see that in my tutorial, in my little helper graphics, it says scale. But if I press it again, now it says rotate. So again, I'm pressing in on the joystick. I'm like pressing it in. Now right and left rotates, which is what you'd normally want to do. You normally don't want to be scaling things, especially if you're doing something with medical simulation where you want it to be accurate to one-to-one scale. But if you want to scale it up, if I press in that joystick again, now I toggled over and I'm in scale mode. So I can scale this up to approximately the right size and leave it there. So we are fine-tuning position. Again, if you have an asset selected, you can use this context menu. If I want to hit delete, duplicate, or reset. Reset is just going to re-rotate it to a 0, 0 origin, so it'll kind of reset it to an origin. I can duplicate it if I want, which would enable me to then duplicate. Oh, I can't duplicate this one for some reason. Let me see. Why couldn't I duplicate it? Interesting. I'm not sure why I can't duplicate that. There's probably a good reason. It's almost certainly user error. It could be because this is a socketed asset. Socketed assets might not be duplicatable. Yeah, I can't duplicate it with my short key either. Yeah, it might be that it has sockets. I'm not really sure about that. But if I grab a primitive asset, for example, and use duplicate, there it's duplicating it. Another shortcut for duplicating is if I grab onto this asset, if I press on my B button on my controller, I can duplicate. So I can just, now it's trying to surface align. So if I turn surface align off, it won't do that. And then I can just copy, 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 copy. So you can make just whatever. So duplicating and resetting, surface align. Okay, the gizmo. Let's talk about the gizmo. So that's something we've been, if I turn surface align on here, when I have this object selected, you can see this big blue, green, and red thing with cubes all around it. This is what's called the gizmo. Now, the gizmo is what you can use if you want to really fine-tune position of an asset. So if I want to just move it a little bit, you see when I point my mouse, my controller, sorry, at these different gizmos, they highlight white. And if I grab onto the blue, so if I point at the blue until it turns white, and then I'm going to use my lower trigger to grab onto it, just like you would an asset, I can only move it in that direction now. Like if I pull it closer or farther, I can't get it. I can only move it in that direction. Similarly, if I grab onto this red arrow, it's only going to move in that direction. Green arrow is only going to be up and down. The circles are a little harder to grab, but if you can grab onto the green circle, it'll only rotate it in that axis. If I grab onto the red circle, it'll only rotate it in that axis. And same with the blue one. Scale is what you do with these cubes. So if I want to actually change the scale, not something I would recommend, but I can actually stretch this out if I want to. There's not very many use cases for this in a medical setting, but you can scale the asset by using those cubes if you'd like. So that's scale, rotate, and move using these gizmos. These little flat planes in here are enable you to move it only on that plane. So if I point at that the yellow square right in the middle here, it's only going to move in that plane now. I can't move it closer or farther. I can only move it in this plane, up, down, left, and right. So if you want to fine tune the position of an asset, that's what you do. If you just want to grab onto it and move it around, you'll want to point at the asset somewhere where there isn't the gizmo. And sometimes if you get pretty far away, the gizmo gets bigger and bigger relative to your position, so it might be a little harder to do. But if I get in close here, if I grab onto the base, now I've got free form grab. Like I can just move it wherever I want. Again, I'm using my joysticks to move it closer or farther away, just my right joystick that I have it held onto with. I'm pressing down on the joystick to pull it in, pressing up on the joystick to move it away. It's surface aligning and I can just freeform grab. But again, the gizmos are for fine tuning. Grabbing it somewhere else is going to enable me to just move it freeform. All right, so that is the gizmo. The gizmo confuses people at first because it's a big, complex looking thing, but it's really not too bad. And it's a very powerful feature for fine tuning position of assets. You can even turn that gizmo off. If you're like, I don't ever want to use the gizmo, you can just turn gizmos off. using your context menu here, and it'll turn that gizmo off. Again, you can toggle visibility. You can toggle whether it's teleportable or not, laser grabbable, hand grabbable we talked about. If you've got a bunch of assets that are invisible, and those invisible, like if I turn this into invisible, now there's these red invisibility icons. If those get in your way, you can just turn those off. But you might get confused about what's set up to be invisible and not. And again, I'm in edit mode, which is why I can still see them and I see those visibility, but those are invisible to a learner. So if I go back into learner mode, now this is what a learner sees. That's gone. I don't see that asset. But if I go to edit mode, there it is. So if I want to make it visible again, I'm just going to turn on visibility, and I want all the socketed assets to be visible. Now if I go to learner mode, there it is. All right. Packs, inventory, filtering by category. We talked about bringing assets into the scene. So again, you just point at it, use your lower trigger to grab onto it and bring it into your scene. We talked about surface aligning. So this is surface aligning to the floor, but if I don't want it to, I turn that off. We talked about duplicating, using either the shortcut on the controller or the duplicate button in the menu, but apparently not with socketed assets, or not, at least not with this asset. Might be a bug. Let's see. This over here, these numbers can change by a specific scale. So if you want to make it 0.5 scale, pretty obvious what that's doing there. Oh, I'm inside of a beating heart. So let's go ahead and delete this stuff. But let's not delete this. Let's pretend like we just created an amazing composition here that we want to save into our scene. If you want to save this configuration, if you leave right now, if I were to just take off the headset and quit, come back again, none of this will be here. It won't remember it. You have to make sure you save your scene. So going back here, we already saved it as demo 1 with an empty, with just the environment and the starting point. Now that we have these objects in here, let's save over it. So if I hit save, it's going to save right over the top of that scene. And now if I go to my library tab, I'll be able to find that demo 1 scene here. There it is. And if I select that and go to load, we should load into that position that we set. So I'm in that position. I do have to rotate a little bit. The arrow of the scene starting point varies because it doesn't necessarily know what the forward direction is if you're in VR. Like it could be any direction. So you might have to rotate around to see it. But here's our composition. Our lovely IV stand and primitive cube composition here. All right, so we've created assets. We talked about the context menu. We've saved our scene. We talked about learner mode. We talked about moving your menu around. I think that's enough for one tutorial. That's quite a bit of info. Just trying to think if there's anything else that I should be covering under the scene or assets menu. I think that's it. If you have any questions at all, send an email to info@acadicus.com. Thanks for watching.